Now, who wants all that happen? Of course, you know, in previous shows we have told you whose plan it is to destroy the Arab world, throw it into chaos, which, by the way, brings me into something. A couple of days ago, I was on an interview on an international channel, English international channel, Press TV. And the other person on that interview was Abdullah Al-Ash'al. We do have his a picture of him for those who know him in the Arab world. Now he is a former deputy foreign minister of Egypt, and he is also a presidential candidate right now in Egypt. So this man was on the same interview, and the host asked me what I thought about Mubarak. Of course, some of you probably know that Mubarak and his sons were actually arrested. Well, they said arrested. Actually, they were brought in for questioning. So the host of that program asked me, it was me and this gentleman there, and there was another gentleman also from London, but the main exchange took place between me and the deputy foreign minister of Egypt and presidential candidate. When they asked me about what do you think of them being arrested, I said, well, they're not really arrested. They are very much, this is more of a publicity stunt by the Supreme Council, the military Supreme Council, to calm down the people, because the people are now asking, okay, you know, hey, look, you know, we got out in the streets, we took Mubarak out, but his regime's still there, the military's still there, everybody's still there, and nothing happened, you know. So, and they started calling for the removal of the head of that Supreme Council, which is General Tantawi. Well, of course, they have to give the people something, and that's exactly what they did. They publicized the bringing down to the station of Mubarak's sons, both of them, Jamal and Ala. And of course, you know, the people were there. So I told them, I said, look, this is not real. What you are witnessing is nothing but more of a calming shot in the arm of the people that, hey, look, we can get the president, Mubarak, we can get him and arrest his sons and all, et cetera, et cetera. And when he talked, Abdullah Al-Ash'al, when he talked, he thought that that was a great accomplishment for the revolution in Egypt. And he started giving a speech as if he was giving a speech in Tahrir Square. The speech should have been written in Arabic because he was talking to an international audience, but he was more, the things he was saying, more of political rhetoric that probably should be spoken at Tahrir Square to his supporters. He said that the revolution has accomplished this, and the revolution, and he went on and on and on about the revolution. And I asked him a few questions. Well, the host said, well, what do you think? I said, well, number one, I'd like to know, when did he really know that there was a revolution in Egypt? How long before Mubarak actually stepped down that Al-Ash'al knew that this was a serious thing? What is it? A week before, a day before, 2 days before? Or maybe he heard it on the news that actually Mubarak stepped down. When did he know? He did not answer. Did he know it a week before? Did he know it 2 weeks before? When did he know it? He did not answer that. I said, and also, you know, can you tell us, where are you, if you are, you talking about this revolution as you planned it? Now, did you plan all this? How long did you plan this? And where are you going? Where are you going with this revolution? Any revolution will have aims and objectives that it wants to actually accomplish. What were those objectives that you want to accomplish? Can you tell me what are you going to do with the United States that has actually invested $1.3 billion in military aid to Egypt every year? What are you going to do with $3 billion that the United States invested in Egypt to feed the people there in Egypt. Maybe you can tell me, what are you going to do with the 40%, the 40% of 80 million people? There are 80 million people in Egypt. 40% of them are below the poverty line. Did the revolution cover all that? Did the revolution cover how they're going to feed the people? If there was actually a revolution. And maybe you can answer, why in the world would Qatar, a very small island, okay, peninsula, sticking out in the Gulf, maybe you can tell me, why would Qatar, with like 20,000 in population, 25,000 or something, I don't know how much Qatar is, maybe 250,000, okay? I'll give him that much. A million, I don't know how much, maybe somebody can, but it doesn't matter. Let's say a million. Very small. Very rich though. Why would they send 3 ships to pick up the Egyptians? This was just like 3-4 days ago, to Libya, to pick up the Egyptians that are fleeing Libya, to take them to Egypt. When Egypt and Libya share borders, why they could not send their ships to go and pick up those? They don't have ships. We have 80 million people in Egypt. Maybe he can tell me why this revolution could not go and pick up the Egyptians. Well, the host threw it back in his lap. And he asked him, he said, how would you answer these questions? You know, these are legit questions. How would you answer them? This is what he said. And the interview is on the internet and anyone can go and see it. He said, Egypt is one of the richest countries in the world. And Egypt does not need the $1.3 billion that the United States is giving them. And Egypt does not need the United States, because you see, this presidential candidate, he's more of the revolutionary type. You know, he's not Mohammed al-Baradei, who's more of a United States guy, and he's not Amr Musa, who's more of a United States guy. So now we know that he's not going to win, because he's anti-United States, and the United States has the biggest share of what is happening there in Egypt. You know, they have financed this chaos that is going on there in Egypt. So Mr. Abdullah al-Ash'al, he is totally, maybe he is saying the right revolutionary things, because right now the atmosphere there in Egypt is a revolutionary atmosphere. Listen, I'm not against revolutions. I have been calling for revolutions in the Arab world. I have been calling for the removal of every one of those heads of states. I want a united Arab world. I want a democratic Arab world. I want the people to elect. But I want these revolutions to come from within. A revolution takes about 20 years just to plan. 20 years. Not a week, not 2 weeks, not 1 year, and not 7 months, because that's all it took to bring some of these young Egyptians to Washington, give them a bunch of laptops to take back there with them, to get all these people online and get people out in the streets. And I told them on this TV interview, $10 million will take the whole country out into the streets. $10 million. That's it. $10 million, you put enough people online on the internet to interact with all these people, saying the right thing that you have already studied and know exactly what they want, know exactly what the slogans you want to give them, know exactly what to tell them. You're going to flip them around, and within a week, within 6 months, let's not go a week, $10 million, 6 months, you will have a revolution on the streets. You will have the people on the streets. So now I want to know how many, I want to know where this revolution is going. Now, he did say that it was, like I said, he said Egypt was the richest country, one of the richest countries. And they have, yes, and by the way, I agree with him that Egypt can become self-sufficient. It can. But this revolution was not built. This was not an economic revolution. This was not even a social revolution. This was more of spontaneous chaos pushed upon the Egyptians by forces that want to send the Arab world into chaos. That's what it was. This was, again, this is not a revolution. There was no aims. The only thing, the only slogan is we want the regime down. Well, tell me what else you want. Tell me once you get the regime down, where are you going? Where are the plans that you have been educating people with for the last 20 years to make them and get them into the day of the revolution, the day when the people go out in the streets? Tell me, where is that plan? Where is that platform? How are you going to tell the United States, no, we don't want your $1.3 billion in military aid? You know what his answer was when I asked him that? He said, oh, well, the Mubarak's sons, they made billions of dollars selling land in Sharm el-Sheikh and selling hotels and selling this. Really? That's the answer? That's the answer to how you are going to get $1.3 billion for the military, for the Egyptian military? And that is your answer for how you are going to feed the people with the $3 billion that you don't want? And do you think the United States has spent that kind of money to hand you Egypt that way? You really think that the United States has spent that kind of money to hand you Egypt and say, Egypt is for the Egyptian. Go do whatever you want. Go thrive and become one of the richest countries in the world, when you have 40% of people under the poverty line? And all his answer was, Egypt is one of the richest countries in the world, and that Mubarak's sons have took all the millions. Really? Is that a revolutionary answer? Or is that an answer that you give to people on the streets and they believe it? Because people will believe that stuff on the streets of Cairo. Oh yeah, we are the richest, one of the richest. With what? With what? Now, I can tell you one thing. Egypt and every country in the Arab world can be rich countries, can be. You know, you want to tell me what do they in Egypt, and not just in Egypt. You know, we're talking about Egypt because I was on an interview with the Egyptian deputy foreign minister and a presidential candidate. That's why we're talking about Egypt. But we can take any country in the Middle East, in the Arab world, and every country can be self-sufficient. Iraq was self-sufficient at one time. Egypt used to export wheat. They used to grow their own wheat and export it. Right now, Egypt does not grow its own wheat. The Egyptian brains have planted the desert. They have planted and they made wheat. But then the United States came and said, look, we're going to give you, of course, that's with the Sadat, Begin, Camp David Accords and all that stuff, that we are going to give you some money for whatever you're doing with Begin and Israel. And we're going to give you, well, where did that money come from? Well, the stipulation was that we're going to give you money to buy our food products like wheat and corn, etc. And that way we are helping our farmers here and at the same time buying you. And it has been working for the last 30-some years that way. Now, this revolutionary leader did not have an answer besides it's the richest country, which I don't see. I don't see. How are you going to be the richest country when the World Bank is what's controlling you? How are you going to be one of the richest country when the International Monetary Fund is meddling in your business. How are you going to do that? Can you tell me what product are you making in Egypt? Can you show me the Egyptian cars and the Egyptian planes and the Egyptian industry? Can you show me? Can you show me technology that is coming from the Arab world? Can you show me what the Arab world exports besides food products that the human being on this earth learned how to do from day one? How to plant? What else? Any technology that was actually originated there. Can you tell me? How are you going to be one of the richest countries if you don't have that? If you still depend on other countries to feed you, other countries to clothe you, other countries to support your military, and with that, you still have 40% of people under poverty line. Now, don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen. I am in no way, and everybody knows that I am straight talker. I don't get paid. I don't have a particular ideology that I follow. I do, but I do not bring it in. And everybody knows that I do not bring my own religious belief into my politics. And I do have the highest respect for every person, every Arab in the Middle East. It doesn't matter if they are Egyptians or not. As a matter of fact, to tell you the truth, I hate these names. I hate for people to say they are Egyptians and they're Palestinians and they are Jordanians and they are Syrians and Libyans and Algerians. I hate that. I despise that. It's just like Americans starting saying we are Louisianans, we're Texans, we are Ohioans, we are Floridians, we are whatever. That's exactly what it is. But no, everybody in the United States think of themselves as Americans, even though this is the country that is made up of everybody in the world, every ideology, every ethnicity, every language, every color and creed, everything right here in the United States. But yet, you will find everyone saying, we are Americans. Well, the Arabs have a lot more in common between them than the Americans will ever dream of. The Arabs have history of thousands of years, a language, heritage, history, a land that they shared and have been sharing for thousands of years. But yet, they're divided. And yet, they go out in the streets chanting, we're Egyptians, we're Palestinians, we're Jordanians. And you know what? That's exactly what the plan is. The plan is to make everybody in those countries not think of themselves as an Arab, because if they think of themselves as an Arab, then they might unite. And if they unite, that is not good for Israel, because the only hang-up that Israel has in that area, that all these people think of themselves as one piece, and it is the only spot there that was brought in by Europeans in that area there. Everybody thinks of themselves, even though imperialist powers 100 years ago divided them into these countries. See, they divided them geographically and politically, but they could not divide them nationally. They could not divide them as Arabs, because everybody still think of themselves as Arabs in that area. What you are seeing now is they are putting Arabs against Arabs in the same country. Not just in different countries, but in the same country, as we see them doing it in Libya. Now they want ceasefire. They want one controlling this side, another controlling the other side, and a third party controlling the south. So that's the division of Libya. That is, we will be seeing. Now, who's doing all that and explaining to the Arab countries what they need to do? Mainly Al Jazeera, because the masses listen and watch Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera has billions of dollars to spend. Mind you, Al Jazeera is supposedly a news agency. And as you know, a news agency would require a budget. And normally in the capital or the capitalist world, we know that these media outlets would have to make profit. Otherwise, they will go out of business. Well, maybe Al Jazeera can explain to its viewers how could it still be there over 10 years and they don't even have one single advertisement from anywhere, except a couple of advertisements from Qatar Airways and Kafka, which is the Qatar oil, which is basically government-owned agency. And therefore, Al Jazeera is an arm of the Qatari government. And Al Jazeera is directing the political scene in the Middle East right now because the masses are the ones that are directing it. Who's directing the masses? Al Jazeera is directing the masses. And then, once the masses started being directed into a certain way and more believing in that, then the other news agencies have no other choice but to try to go along with that and start speaking the same language of Al Jazeera. Because that's what everybody wants to hear. Just like here in the United States. You get them going one way and all of a sudden every politician will start talking the language of the streets because that's what keeps them in power now. It's not the regime, it's the language of the streets. Now, who's directing the language of the street? It's Qatar through Al Jazeera. So Qatar very much, who actually aspires to be a superpower in that region, they want to be the leader of the Arab world where no one can say anything. So they have employed Al Jazeera. So to me, Al Jazeera is the 21st century Qatari army. You know, like in Rome, they used to send all these thousands of people to go and conquer land. Now Qatar is sending Al Jazeera to conquer all these Arab countries so they can say, yes, master, to Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera becomes with no oppositions because no one would oppose them. You've seen how they manipulate it. Now, this is only one scene, but this goes on in everything that Al Jazeera does. Everything they do in the news, their news is not news, it is commentary. You will hear their reporters talking as if they were part of that revolution. It's like, wait a minute, you're there to cover it, but you're talking as you're one of them. Well, of course, the Arab streets like that because the Arab streets want these regimes for 30 or 40 years or 50 years. The Arab streets have been ready to get rid of these dictators. Is the other side really that brilliant that they can think 30 years and 40 years and 50 years ahead? Are they that brilliant that they can actually think of putting Al Jazeera? And by the way, I have been talking and I have been an opponent of Al Jazeera since I started looking into what Al Jazeera is doing and seeing and hearing what Al Jazeera wants people to know. And I started questioning, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Anyway,